For the next hour or so, I ask that you would just push those things aside, make them less important than what we know to be the most important thing, and that is you and our worship of you. So be with us, God, as we worship you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Remember those walls that we called sin and shame. They were like prisons that we couldn't escape. But he came and he died and he rose. Those walls are rumble now. Remember those giants we called death and grave. They were like mountains that stood in our way. But he came and he died and he rose. Those giants are dead now. Oh, this is our God. This is who he is. He loves us. This is our God. This is what he does. He saves us. He bore the cross and beat the grave. Let heaven and earth proclaim, this is our God, King Jesus. Remember that fear that took our breath away. Faith so weak that we could barely pray. But he heard every word, every whisper. Now those altars in the wilderness tell the story of his faithfulness. Never once did he fail, and he never will. Oh, this is our God. This is who he is. He loves us. Oh, this is our God. This is what he does. He saves us. He bore the cross. He beat the grave. Let heaven and earth proclaim, this is our God, King Jesus. Who pulled me out of that pit? He did, he did. Who paid for all of our sin? Nobody but Jesus. Who pulled me out of that pit? He did, he did. Who paid for all of our sin? Nobody but Jesus. Who rescued me from that grave? Yahweh, Yahweh. Who gets the glory and praise? Nobody but Jesus. Who rescued me from that grave? Yahweh, Yahweh. Who gets the glory and praise? Nobody but him. This is our God. This is who he is. He loves us. So this is our God. This is what he does. He saves us. He bore the cross, beat the grave. Let heaven and earth proclaim. to sing these songs as I often do. Every song must end, and you never do. So I throw up my hands and praise you again and again, 'cause all that I have is hallelujah, hallelujah. And I know it's not much, but I've nothing else fit for a king except for a heart singing hallelujah, hallelujah. I've got one response. I've got just one move. With my arms stretched wide, I will worship you. So I throw up my hands and praise you again and again, 'cause all that I have is hallelujah, hallelujah. And I know it's not much, but I've nothing else fit for a king except for a heart singing hallelujah, hallelujah. Oh, come on, my soul. Oh, don't you get shy on me. Lift up your song, 'cause you've got a lion inside of those lungs. Get up and praise the Lord. Oh, come on, my soul. Oh, don't you get shy on me. Lift up your song, 'cause you got a lion inside of those lungs. Get up and praise the Lord. Come on, my soul. Oh, don't you get shy on me. Lift up your song, 'cause you got a lion inside of those lungs. Get up and praise the Lord. So I throw up my hands and praise you again and again. 'Cause all that I have is a hallelujah, hallelujah. And I know it's not much, but I'm nothing else fit for a king except for a heart singing hallelujah, hallelujah. So I throw up my hands and praise you again and again, 'cause all that I have is a hallelujah, hallelujah. And I know it's not much, but I've nothing else fit for a king except for a heart singing hallelujah, hallelujah. And I know it's not much, but I've nothing else fit for a king except for a heart singing hallelujah,
God, as always, we thank you for meeting us in this place, Lord. Be with us as we study your word. Be with us, Lord, as we learn about what it takes to draw nearer to you in this special way, in this special story that we're going to study today. Be with us, God, in your heavenly name. Everybody said, amen. You can be seated. Kids can head down to your classrooms, back this direction. Hopefully, have you been handling the heat okay? Like, it's been warm, and it's going to be really, really warm today. And I was thinking this morning about how in the 14 and 1500s, churches were different than ours, in that you know where the furnace was in churches in the 14 and 1500s? You know how they heated the building? It would have been right here. So in the winters, the warmest people in the church would have been the people who sat in the front rows. And so the front rows were different than they are today. They were the most prized seats in the house. So prized that guess what the churches did? They started charging people more money to sit in the front seats. And I'm not saying that that's a good idea, but I am saying they probably made a lot of money. And what I am going to say is I'm just glad that we have air conditioning in the building. And you don't have to sit closer to me, like in the blast zone here, to stay cool. And it's a good place that we can go, we can worship, and it's nice and cool in here as well. So let's just be thankful for that today, that it's a place that we can go and we can enjoy together. I decided that I wanted to start today by spoiling a movie for you. Is that okay? I'm not too worried about it, though, because this movie came out over 40 years ago. So it's not likely that it was in your next up, like on Netflix or Apple TV or one of those things. The movie came out in May of 1980, and I am going to spoil the whole movie, but I'm really going to focus on spoiling a specific scene in the movie. The movie takes place in a galaxy far, far away, this scene happens on a seemingly deserted planet called Dagobah. And our main character is a man named Luke. He's looking for what he believes to be this mighty warrior, a Jedi master, who can train Luke in the ways of the Jedi so that he can once and for all defeat the dark side, and specifically this evil character that's kind of in charge of the dark side at the time, Darth Vader. Ooh, right? You guys know the movie I'm talking about? At least you probably know the world that movie exists in. The Empire Strikes Back is the movie. It's widely considered, I'm not saying that I necessarily consider it there, but it's widely considered to be the greatest Star Wars movie ever made. It made $400 million the year that it was released, and that was in 1980. And if you adjust that for inflation, to put it in perspective, that ranks one spot ahead of the very first Avenger movie, and a couple slots below Lion King, which, you know, they've made movies and releases of movies and different versions of the same movie and Broadway shows of that movie. So it was a very, very successful movie. In this scene, there's a scene where Luke Skywalker is training, right? He finds Yoda. He's not the picture of the Jedi Master that he thought he would be. But Luke is deep into his training, and at a certain point, he senses this presence from this cave nearby. And so he feels drawn to this cave, and he knows that the cave is, well, what's drawing him is this dark side of the Force, because the Force has kind of good and bad, like light and dark, and he's got a lot of the Force in him, but we learn through the course of this series that it's a little bit of light and a little bit of dark, and so he's drawn to this cave. He goes into the cave, and what does he find in the cave? He finds Darth Vader, and he fights, he gets in this lightsaber sword fight with Darth Vader, and ultimately he kills Darth Vader, but like it's not actually Darth Vader. It's like Dreamscape, Dark Force Darth Vader. But when he kills him, and this was an amazing and impactful scene for me at the ripe old age of 4 when I watched this probably for the first time, 4 or 5. I was born in 77, came out in 80. We didn't go to the movies very often, so we probably saw it a couple years later on VHS, which is a thing for you younger people that we used to have that was before CDs and before tapes and before the internet. And we're not going to go down that road because I'm just going to continue to feel older and older and older. But what happens in this fight is Luke Skywalker cuts off Darth Vader's head, and it goes rolling, and then it lands here, and then for some reason the mask on Darth Vader's face explodes, and what does he see? He sees himself. he sees his own face. And as a 4-year-old kid, I was kind of blown away, just thinking, don't judge me for my ability to comprehend like plot lines at 4 years old, but I'm like, well, does he have an evil twin, or is this some sort of a robot version, or maybe that's the real Luke and he's the robot version? What's happening? I don't really know. Is Luke really a bad guy? And of course, this is where I'm going to spoil the end of the movie for those of you who haven't seen it, so I apologize. But Darth Vader was Luke's father. Yeah, sorry, in case you didn't know. He was his father, and so there was this connection to the dark side. And there was this force that lived in him that kind of wanted him to do good and kind of wanted him to do evil, and he was perpetually fighting this force. I tell you about this because there's a connection between that scene and the story that we're exploring today, if you can believe that. But you have to wait to the end to get the connection. We've been looking at stories that appear in every gospel account. So Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, like we've said 100 times during this series, there are 4 different people. Maybe the Gospels were written by people with that name, maybe not, but they certainly were written by people who were a profile of Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, in that they had certain experiences and they were writing to certain audiences. They had certain perspectives, certain purposes in mind. And as if any of us were to write a story about somebody who we all knew, we would probably include different details. So did Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But there are a handful of stories that find their way into every account of Jesus' life. And so we've been looking at some of those stories up to this point. Today we're talking about a story that the Bible calls the Garden of Gethsemane. That's how you pronounce it, in case you have read that and you weren't sure. The Garden of Gethsemane is a place where Jesus would often go to pray. Last week we talked about the Passover, the celebration of the Israelites' emancipation from freedom some 1,500 years ago. They would celebrate by eating this meal together. And last week we talked about how as they gathered together, in the middle of this meal, this celebration, Jesus kind of dropped a bomb on the disciples. And it wasn't like he hadn't been saying these things all along, but he did it in a unique way. He told them, my body must be broken, my blood will be poured out, and it will be a new covenant in my blood. It will establish this new relationship, this new promise that exists between God and mankind. He told them at the dinner that Judas Iscariot was going to betray them. One gospel even says that at that point when Judas left to go begin this process of betrayal, that's when the devil entered Judas. That's when Satan took over Judas's heart and mind entirely. So they go to the garden after this meal. And Jesus goes there with one purpose in mind, and that purpose is to pray. He takes his disciples. We're told that he takes his disciples with him, but he only takes them to a certain point. They all go to the garden. Matthew, his gospel tells us that Jesus brought the disciples to a point and then said, you guys wait here, and I'm going to go a little further. And he said, Peter, James, John, you guys come with me. And if you don't know anything about the dynamic of the people who are in the Bible, there's Jesus. His best friend was probably John. And then Peter and James and John were 3 guys that were a whole lot closer to Jesus than maybe the rest, the other 12. So we get their names a lot. We get the names of the 12 a lot. And then there are more. There are accounts of 70 and 72 and really hundreds of followers of Jesus who go along with him. So when we say disciples, the Bible could be talking about all of these people, but then there are specific times where it refers to just the 12 or just the 3 or just the disciple that Jesus loved, which would have been John. So here we are. He took the 12, and we're pretty certain that it was just the 12, and then he takes the 3 deeper. And at a certain point, it tells us that he leaves the 3 behind and he goes on even further alone. So we learned some of that stuff from Matthew. Luke tells us a lot less about the details of what happens in the garden, but he does tell us that Jesus goes to what he calls a usual place. It's a usual place that he goes to pray at the Mount of Olives. And I got to thinking about that, and I thought, do you have usual places that you go? Do you have places that are like beyond your house, right, or your job? Do you have usual places that you go that are comfortable for you to be? this morning, it's ironic that this happened this morning. I pulled up to the Starbucks over here in Shadle, and it's kind of the closest Starbucks to my house, and so when I want coffee fast, I can pull in there. And the person, I pulled up, and they said, "Hey, welcome to Starbucks. What can I?" "Oh, hi, Pete. Do you want your usual?" Because they're looking at you through the camera, right, when you pull up. And I knew that there were a couple of people there who knew me, who I interact with regularly, but I didn't know that this girl knew me, and I'm like, "Oh, it's interesting. Must be a usual place for me," that she knew that I was there usually and that I had a usual order. I had a place near my house where I used to live like 15 years ago that I didn't even have to stop my car when I pulled in to order coffee. I could just like slow roll and like hand the money and exchange the drink and then just go, like, because it was my usual place and it was my usual order and I knew what it cost. My wife and I, we do something every Saturday morning where we drive down to Kendall Yards, we park, and she goes on a run because she's a better person than me, and I go on a walk because maybe one day I'll get there, I don't know. But then we go different directions, and then we meet up at this place where we have crepes. And we do this pretty much every Saturday that we're available and in town. It's just kind of a date thing that we do, and we talk about what we saw and what we experienced on the walk and the run, and then we share a meal together. And now we've been doing it for a couple of summers, and the people just know what we order. It's our usual place, and they're like, "You want your usual?" "Yep." "Okay," and then they bring it out, and our orders are similar, but just a little bit different, and they never get it wrong. Because we go there all the time. It's our usual place. By the way, we call that our Trapes and Crepes date because we like walk and run and crepe. As a pastor, we have to pun everything. We punt it, if you will. Punt. Sorry, I shouldn't say sorry. I'm not going to apologize for that. I stand by that. Pastors punt things. But this is our usual place. We go there regularly. Jesus regularly goes to the Garden of Gethsemane at the base of the Mount of Olives. It's a usual place for him. It's so usual that all the gospel writers knew that it was his usual place. And Judas, the betrayer, one of the 12, Judas knew that it was a usual place for Jesus to be. So he went, when he betrayed Jesus, he went to the temple guard, he went to the religious leaders, he went to the Roman centurions. He said, "I know where he'll be because he's always here. He's always in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's always praying there. So this is where we'll find him." There are a lot of things that we can learn from this story. And if you want to read more about this story, you'll find it in Matthew 26, you'll find it in Mark 14, you'll find it in Luke 22, and you'll find it in John 18. But I want to focus our time on what happens after Jesus tells the disciples to wait behind. What happens when Jesus says, "I'm going to do the rest alone. I want you to do what I say, but I've got to do the rest of this alone." John doesn't tell us a lot about that period. So if we're looking at the different Gospels and we're trying to decide, what happened and what does it say and what's important here and how do they all mix together, we're not going to find a lot of that in John. Almost none of what happens after Jesus leaves the disciples behind and goes on alone. We're not going to find most of that in John. We'll find very little in Matthew and very little in Luke. But Mark gives us a robust picture of what happened. So we're going to focus on the story of Mark today, and I want to note that this is ironic because Mark is the shortest gospel account. Mark is the one where very little of Mark is only found in Mark. Only 3% of what we find in Mark is only found in Mark. The other 97% you can read about in Matthew and in Luke and in John. Mark was written to Romans, a group of people that didn't really care about the details. They wanted to know, like, what direction are we going and how quickly can we get this thing accomplished? They were like high power, fast paced, but it's Mark's gospel account of this story that gives us the most detail. So that's what we're going to focus on, and this is what we're going to do. I want to read this section of the story in its entirety, right? It's not very long, it's 10 verses. So I'm going to read these 10 verses, and then we're going to explore what this means for us. Are you with me on that? Okay, good. So this comes from Mark 14, beginning in verse 32. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little further, he fell to the ground and prayed, that if possible, the hour might pass from him. Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet, not what I will, but what you will. Then he returned to the disciples and found them sleeping. Simon, he said to Peter, are you asleep? And I want to pause there for a second. Don't read ahead. I know it's on the screen. His name was Simon, right? And these are like Anglican, these are English versions of the name. His name was Simon, but early on in his ministry, Jesus said, you shall be Peter, and on this rock, because Peter means rock, on this rock I will build my church. So I think that's a detail that we can miss here. Simon, he said to Peter. Why would he say Simon? Because he wasn't acting like Peter. He was acting like that other guy who Jesus was trying to leave behind. Simon, he says to Peter, are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Ever feel like you don't know what to say to God? I do. But returning the third time, he said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Enough! The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise and let us go. Here comes my betrayer. It's at that point that Judas appears with an angry mob, a crowd, church leaders and centurions carrying clubs and swords and all sorts of other weapons. And it's interesting. I heard an account of this that said, because in my mind this is like a handful of people, but I heard a historical account that said this could have been as many as 500 or 600 people that were coming to collect Jesus, because they knew that he was a threat, and they traveled in certain sects, right? And so if there were Roman centurions, there would be a certain amount. And if there was a religious guard, there would be a certain amount. And if there were Pharisees, there would be a certain amount. So this likely wasn't a handful of people, right, standing with the 11 disciples and Jesus. This was probably tens, dozens, maybe even hundreds of people who had come to capture Jesus. And they were armed. They were a bloodthirsty, angry mob. And Judas, though, was a coward. And he thought that if he could betray Jesus in a way that didn't expose his own betrayer, then maybe he would avoid punishment somehow. Jesus will never know if I come and I kiss him on the cheek. So that's what he did. He'd set up with the guard that, hey, the one that I kiss on the cheek is the one that you need to take into custody. And the different gospel accounts tell us different things about what Jesus says to Judas. You know, why have you come? Come, friend, do what you came to do, that kind of thing. But it's at this point that Judas comes and he turns Jesus over to the people. And it's at this point that Jesus knew what was taking place. He already knew what was going to happen. He knew when Judas kissed him on the cheek that was the beginning of the end of his last day or days here on earth. Jesus knew and didn't try to fight them, but that didn't stop Peter from fighting. We're going to talk about Peter and Judas next week, and I'm really excited to share that story with you, because the betrayal of Judas and the betrayal of Peter, they were kind of the same. And we think very differently about Judas and Peter, and we do so because of what happened after they came face to face with their betrayal. So I'm excited about that, but one thing that I'll tell you that we'll explore more next week is that Peter had to save face. God said, you are all going to leave me. Peter, you're going to deny me. And what did Peter say? No. Not me. I'll be with you till the end. And so these guys came carrying clubs and swords. And Peter's like, well, shoot, I said I would be here till the end. What can I do? So he cuts off the ear of somebody who's trying to take Jesus into custody. And one account, Luke's account, tells us something that when I read this story, it blows my mind. He says that Jesus picked up the ear, and what did he do with it? He healed him. Now, if you're a group of people charged with taking into custody the guy who's telling people that he's God, and while you're taking him into custody, he does something that only God could do, wouldn't it give you a little bit of pause? Like, I'm going to take this guy into custody, and then you get your ear cut off, and then he heals it. At least this guy At least Malchus, the guy whose ears was cut off, at least he should have went, whoa, hold on, guys. Are we sure we've got the right guy? This guy might be who he says he is. But they don't. They don't. They take him into custody, and ultimately it ends with Jesus' death on the cross. Thankfully, that's not the end of the story. Here's what I want us to take away from this passage that we just read. Jesus knows things are going to go badly, doesn't he? Like in the grand scheme, we call it good. But Jesus knows that painful experiences lie ahead for him, doesn't he? I mean, we know that he does because at dinner he told them, my body's going to be broken. My blood is going to be shed. I'm going to be betrayed. Peter's going to deny me. All of you are going to abandon me in your own ways. He had told them before when he sent the disciples out for their first missionary journeys. He'd said, hey, when you go out, don't take a sword with you. You don't need to protect yourself. I will protect you. Go, don't even take extra clothing. Just go with what you have on your back and go to places, and if they're hospitable, share the gospel with them. And if they're not, just leave. You don't need to defend yourself physically. I've got this. Here in the upper room, what does Jesus say? He says, hey, you know how I said don't take a sword before? If you have an extra cloak, sell it and buy a sword because you're going to need it. Because things are going to get very, very ugly, very, very quickly. Jesus knows. Have you ever been in a situation where you just knew that something bad was about to happen? Like sometimes that's because of intuition, isn't it? Sometimes we just have a sense that we're not in a good place. That something bad, something evil, something corrupt, something horrible is about to happen. And we get that feeling and you get goosebumps around. I know a guy who, he had this, his daughter said, hey, Daddy, she was 19 or 20 and she was living at home. She said, I'm going to go hang out with friends. They're having a little party. And he's like, hey, I really don't want you to go. I've just got this really bad feeling about what's going to happen at this party. I can't explain it, but I've got this intuition. And she's like, Dad, it's going to be fine. It's friends, and it's not a big deal. So she went to the party, and she wasn't drinking. She wasn't doing drugs. She was just hanging out with friends sitting on the couch. But behind her in the kitchen, there was a guy who had just bought a new pistol, and he wanted to show his pistol to his friend. And he didn't really know how it worked. He'd bought it used from someone illegally. So as he racked the slide, he ended up expelling a bullet, and she was shot in the head. She died on the spot. And I remember him talking later. He was the guy that I went to church with, and he said, I knew that she shouldn't go. I don't know how to explain it, but I knew that she shouldn't go. And I tried to get her to not go. And while she was gone, I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and this thing still happened. And he was having a hard time with his faith because he's like, I prayed that this would go differently. There are times where we're certain bad things are happening, but we don't really have any proof. There are other times, like in the case of Jesus, that all he needs to do is look around and go, yeah, this is the stuff that was written about me a couple thousand years ago, and 1,000 years ago, and 800 years ago, and 700 years ago, and 600 years ago, and 500 years ago, and 450 years ago. This is the prophetic things. These things are about to happen. Sometimes we look around and we say, I'm in a bad place, not because we have a sense of intuition, but because we know we're in a bad place. Sometimes we look around and we say, bad things are going to happen because we know that bad things are going to happen. And that's what happens with Jesus here. But here's the example that he sets for us. And this is one of the things that I want you to take away from this story. When Jesus is in a bad place, certain that something bad is about to happen. And that might be the biggest understatement of the day, right? That something bad is about to happen and then Jesus dies. He knows that something bad is going to happen. So what does he do? He goes deeper into the garden to pray. He goes to his usual place to pray his usual prayer. And what does God do in the moment? Does God say, I know that you believe bad things are going to happen, but instead I'm going to make it so that bad things don't happen. Instead, you're not going to have to break your body. You're not going to have to pour out your blood. Your friends are not going to deny you. They're going to stay by your side the whole time. You're not going to have to go to the cross. And Judas is going to come back. He's going to apologize. He's going to repent. You're all going to be one big happy family of disciples in Jesus again. Is that what happens when Jesus prays? Have you ever prayed a prayer because you were pretty sure something bad was going to happen, and the more you prayed, the worse you felt Because the more convinced you were that what you didn't want to happen was about to happen anyway. Some people hear it directly. There are stories in the Bible of people saying, God, please don't do this bad thing. And God says, not only am I going to do this bad thing, but it's going to be bad on a level that you don't even fully understand yet. There are times where we bring our concerns to God and we say, God, comfort us or heal us. Bring grace in a way that only you can bring. And God says, I'm sorry, but not this time. Because this is what I've ordained to have happen. Have you ever prayed that prayer? I know that some of you have prayed that prayer. There are times where it feels like God is not listening. It feels like God does not care. It feels like God has fully abandoned us. And we go to God and we say, God, be with me, be with me, be with me. And he says, I am. But bad things are still going to happen. And that's what happened with Jesus. He prayed that prayer, and then God, he was affected in such a way that he was sorrowful to the point of death. He prayed that prayer, and he didn't have his sorrow removed. It was worse. So he said here, I need you guys to stay here. I need to go on ahead. I need to pray this prayer again because I feel sorrow so substantially that I feel like I'm dying. So here's another thing that I want you to take away. Sometimes what you pray for is not going to be what God gives you. Sometimes what you pray for protection against is not going to be how God chooses to answer the prayer. Sometimes you're going to so want a situation to be differently, and God's going to say, not this time. That happens. And it's easy for us when God says that to us, when we say, God, heal this person, God, comfort me, God, give grace in the way that only you can give. Sometimes we go, all right, must be time to stop praying then. God made it clear to me, and I feel worse than when I started. My relationship with God is fractured because of this prayer that I prayed where God said, you know what I'm going to do already, and I'm not going to change my mind. And people get angry with God, and we walk away from God. Sometimes relationships are completely broken with God forever. But what does Jesus do? Does Jesus say, okay, well, I heard what you said, so I'm just going to accept it, I'm going to move on, I'm going to wait for this all? No, what does he do? He continues to pray. So rule number 1 is pray always, even when the answer we hear from God is not a compelling answer. Rule number 2 is especially when the answer we hear from God is not a compelling answer, pray again. And keep praying. That's exactly what Jesus does. He goes to the garden and he prays and he feels sorrow. So he goes deeper and he prays and he feels sorrow and he goes deeper and he prays again. Rule number 1 is to pray always. Rule number 2 is to see rule number 1, pray always. And rule number 3, it's unique. And it may be the reason some of you are thinking, what does any of this have to do with Luke Skywalker? Because that's where we started. Why did you tell us that story? Here's why. There are times where it's our responsibility to pray that God would bind up evil, barricade the demons, keep the devil at bay. There are times where outside influences are affecting our life in such a way where we go, that thing is evil, that person is evil, that being is evil, and God, I need you to protect me from those things. But when Jesus prayed, that's not the prayer that he prayed, especially at the very end. See, because Jesus realized that demons and principalities and devils and the input of evil from the outside had no effect on him. But there was one final boss that Jesus needed to have conquered. And do you know where that boss lived? People pray for deliverance. People pray for protection against demons. People pray for protection against evil things, and we should. But guess what? I believe that God has prepared you to stand against those things already. And the hardest battle that you're going to face, the greatest giant, the final boss, is the one inside of your head where sin lives that tells us, you don't really need to do that. You don't really need to go to that place. You can relax on this thing that you said you'd do, that you made a commitment to, that you're not going to do anymore. You can let those things go. It's an internal thing, and it's not a demon. It's not a devil. It's not an oppressive spirit. It's just you as a human who has a sin nature inside all of us, a proclivity to sin, an inclination to sin. Sometimes the battle that you need to face is against yourself. Like, we've all probably been in a fist fight. We've had an enemy, junior high, like who's picking on us all the time. We've had a bully. We've had people on social media spreading doubt. We've all been in different kinds of battles. I know we have military people in the room who've been in battles that most of us couldn't stomach. And they've experienced battles on the battlefield and then after that were not things that they would wish on anybody. And we're thankful that they would go and fight on our behalf to protect us. The point is, we've all been in a physical battle. We've all experienced that in some way. We've all been in spiritual battles. We've all felt the oppression of dark forces at different times. We've all had intuition that says bad things are about to happen. If I were to ask you to tell me about a time in your life where you were facing a battle, you could probably draw me a detailed picture. You could probably communicate to me exactly what that looked like. What did evil look like when you faced it? What did opposition look like when it came against you and compromised your relationship with God? But here's something that we can learn from Luke Skywalker, and maybe, hopefully, more from Jesus, and a little bit from Taylor Swift, because, hi, I'm the problem. It's me, right? I know that's a bad one. I apologize for that one. I don't apologize for the earlier one, but I apologize for that one. The point is that sometimes the greatest enemy that you need to fight is yourself. You don't need deliverance. God delivered you. I'm not saying that you don't. I'm saying there are times. But that's not what you need. And I know people who pray and pray and pray and pray and pray to be delivered, and it's like, dude, I think you're delivered. You're just making really bad decisions over here. You're just continuing to sin on purpose. Don't do that anymore. You need to be delivered from yourself, not from the devil, not from a demon. You need to overcome yourself. And that's the prayer that Jesus prays. Lord, take this cup from me, but not my will, yours. Not what I want, what you want. I don't want to carry this, but if you want me to carry it, then teach me to carry it. Teach me to love carrying it on your behalf. Strengthen me as I do that. Sometimes the only head that needs chopped off is your own, and you have to be the one to do it if you're going to follow God. And if you're going to follow Jesus' example, he goes to a usual place and he prays, and then he prays, and then he prays. He prays again and again and again, but not for deliverance from an outside source, but from deliverance from his own will. The thing that may make Jesus rightfully say, my will be done, and why would I die for these people? I'm better than them in every way. That's what Jesus could have said. Hold on a second. I'm going to be turned over. I'm going to be whipped. I'm going to be beaten within an inch of my life. I'm going to be hung on a cross. I'm going to die, and they're going to abuse me after I die. I'm going to be tucked away in a grave. People are going to celebrate my death. They're going to release a murderer in exchange for me, a known murderer, a known insurrectionist. And they're going to celebrate. No. I'm not going to die for these people. Why would I do that? Jesus could have done that, and he would have been right to do it. That's what's so amazing about the gospel, is he didn't have to. But he chose to. He said to God, not my will, your will, not my version of healing or winning or cure or any other thing, yours, not my life, yours. Your will be done, everything be done in my life for your sake. There are times that the giant that we have to slay is the one that lives inside ourselves, that potential to sin, that proclivity to sin. Jesus was human. Jesus was tempted by the same things that we were tempted by. But Jesus stood strong against it. And part of the reason that he stood strong against those things is because he certainly put God's will above his own, a divine will above his own will as a human. And that's the last thing that I want us to pay attention to. We celebrate what happened on the cross. We look at Jesus' death on the cross and the resurrection that happened after, and we celebrate that. But sure, we grieve the loss of Jesus. We grieve the abhorrent, violent, vicious, terrible way that Jesus had to die. But we do celebrate what that death did and what it means to us. God took an instrument of destruction and he used it to inspire hope around the world. But here's what I want us to remember. The victory was not won on the cross. The victory was won in the garden. Because what happened in the garden allowed Jesus to go to the cross and to stand up to those things that happened in that way. I'm sure Jesus saw demons celebrating in that place. I don't know that, but I just kind of believe that. I'm sure that Jesus saw evil in that place as he hung on the cross, but he was prepared because the victory had been won in the garden. I think many of us are like Peter, and we say, when bad stuff happens, God, I'm with you, I'm for you. But Jesus is saying, whether you're with me there or not depends on what you do in this place, your usual place, your normal place, your regular place, the place you go to interact with me in a normal way. And we think about these big grand things. I'd take a bullet for this person. Yeah, but how about instead we live our lives in a way that prepares us to make those decisions when they happen? That's what Jesus did. That's the example that he set for us, to go to a place regularly, so regular that people knew he would be there. And he didn't let that stop him. He went to the place. This is where I go. This is where I pray. And he prayed a prayer that was, God, make me less, and may you be made more. As much as we can celebrate that the victory was won on the cross, I think we're missing out on the fact that the victory was really won in the garden. So what I want to ask you is that, where's your garden? Are you going to the garden? Are you going with people? Are you finding sorrow there and then you're leaving the garden? You're like, this place sucks. Every time I get here, God tells me he's going to do something bad. Because Jesus stays there, and he goes deeper into the garden. And he continues to pray. He continues to reach into to find God's will and God's heart. He prays again and again and again and again. I hope that we're willing to go to the garden. If we want to win the victory that Christ won on the cross, the way we do it is by going to the garden. So as we close, I'm going to pray, and I'm going to give you just a moment to let God kind of convict you. I really do believe that while we pray, God speaks to us, right? And sometimes we hear things and we're like, that can't be from God, and sometimes it isn't. So there's an element of discernment and wisdom that we have to use. Not everything that we hear as we're praying is necessarily from God. So we do have to have people around us. Jesus didn't need the disciples around him for that reason, but they needed each other around themselves for those reasons. And I would encourage you to put people around yourself too. If you're like, I want to go to the garden, I want to establish this pattern, this usual place, this usual pattern of prayer in my life, find somebody. You don't have to go deep alone the very first time all by yourself. You take people with you and you go, hey, I really want to go to the garden. And that may not mean that you get together and you bow down and pray together. Maybe you do. Maybe you have a group of people who you gather together with and you pray. But maybe what that looks like is you say, hey, keep me accountable to this. I'd like to get better at this. So can you ask me about it? Can you text me? Can you call me every week? Here's my commitment. And then when they say, hey, did you go to the garden? You say yes or no. You're honest with them. You don't lie to them. So here's what I want to do. I want us to bow our heads and close our eyes, and we're going to pray, and I'm going to give you a moment that hopefully God will convict you in this, maybe show you a person. So let's just go to God in prayer now. And God, as we're approaching you prayerfully, I just first want to say, Lord, if there's somebody in the room who doesn't know you, who's heard your story, who's heard about what a relationship with you looks like, God, I pray that they're not scared away by the fact that sometimes bad things happen. Christians know that becoming a Christian doesn't mean that bad things aren't going to happen to them. They are. In fact, the Bible tells us that sometimes becoming a Christian means that more bad things will happen to us, because persecution is a real thing. Sometimes we drop bass guitars, and that kind of stuff happens too. But God, I just want to pray that things like that wouldn't be distraction to us this morning. We do pray that the bass is okay. And that's not a prayer that's too small for you to care about. God, you want us to pray in usual ways, to go to usual places and to pray usual prayers. And God, to understand that it's unusual that the creator of all things has created space for us, that we don't have to schedule time where you'll meet us along with the other 8 billion people in the world at a certain time where we may or may not be alive at that point in history. No, we can go behind you at any time and we can have your full attention, because that's how you work, and we don't understand it, but we know that that's how you work. So God, we come before you right now and we say, Lord, if there's somebody in the midst who's on the fence, who's on the edge of saying, I want this relationship that Pastor Pete talks about week after week, God, I pray that they would pray in this moment, Lord, forgive me. I'm a sinner, and only you can save me. And I pray that while they say those words out loud or in their hearts and their heads, they would understand that there's power in them. That they may seem like usual, ordinary, normal words, but what you do in our heart as a response to those words, God, and the plea that we make to you to save us is no ordinary thing. It's an extraordinary thing. So God, first I want to just pray for the people in the room who may be on the fence, who may be ready to take that step, who came here today that said, I don't know if I'm ever going to come back to church or not, but if I'm there today and the pastor says something about giving my life to Jesus, about this relationship that we can have, that sometimes it feels normal, but it's not normal. Sometimes it feels ordinary, but it's extraordinary. I don't know. God, if that's something that somebody came here this morning with, Lord, I pray that you would convict them that this is no ordinary relationship. This relationship saves us from our sin. It saves us from those things that we talked about, demons and devils. It saves us from ourselves. And it sets us apart to be in relationship with you. So first, God, if there are people here who've prayed that prayer, affirm what you're doing in them. And God, give them the courage to tell somebody after the service, to say, hey, I gave my life to Jesus, or I recommitted my life to Jesus because I want this. I want the type of relationship that makes it usual for me to go to the garden and pray and interact with God and to hear from him. And I want his comfort and help through the bad times. Even though the bad times may still be bad, I want to have someone with me to walk alongside me when I go through those. And second, God, for those of us here who maybe have been walking with you for a long time, but we're ready to take another step, to go deeper in the garden, Lord, show somebody to us right now, just in this moment. Put somebody in our mind that we can ask to keep us accountable. Impart a person on us, God, that we can go to and say, would you help me with this? And bind up any fear or awkwardness or reticence about doing those things. God, make us bold. Allow us to boldly go to somebody and say, hey, can you help me with this? Can you keep me accountable to this thing? Lord, I'm thankful to have a church that keeps each other accountable. I'm thankful to have a place that we can go, air-conditioned or not, that we can go to celebrate what you're doing in our lives. I'm thankful that even though bad things do continue to happen, and sometimes it's very clear that they will, Lord, you can still be celebrated in that place. But I also understand that for us to develop that attitude, we have to go to the garden. So God, provide us people, provide us a place, provide us a desire to go to the garden, to model what you did, to go to a usual place to pray. And then God, overwhelm us with what you do while we're there. In Jesus' heavenly name, amen.
There's no place I would rather be. No place I would rather be. No place I would rather be than here in your love, here in your love. There's no place I would rather be. No place I would rather be. No place I would rather be than here in your love, here in your love. Oh, here in your love.
Amen. Amen. Hope you have a wonderful week. And remember, this next Friday, we're all getting together. So bring something. Bring a friend. This is something that, the community of the church is something that we want to invite people into. It's not something that we just want to do on our own. Relationship with Jesus is not something that we just do on our own. We bring other people along with us. We do go to the garden, but we bring people with us. God does pull us into deeper places sometimes, but even then we go there with other people. We are not Jesus. We are his disciples. So let's act like his disciples. Let's be together. I'm looking forward to Friday. Bring a friend, bring some food, bring some games. Have a wonderful time and have a wonderful week.